be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody's ready for what I think is going to be a really fun show here on a Sunday night. Wasn't on paper the most, big picture college football Saturday that we've had in a while, but I thought there were a lot of conversations that need to come out of it. We'll start with A&M smacking down LSU. And oh, by the way, Mike Elko smacking down Jimbo Fisher. And yes, it was obviously directed at Jimbo Fisher. We'll discuss the conversation there, what happened there, all that good stuff. From there, we'll kind of go to a conversation. I don't know how many other people will have, but Auburn beats Kentucky for their first SEC win. And listen, I'll just be transparent. I think Mark Stoops, Kentucky, they got to figure out a way at the end of the season to part ways, figure it out. I don't know how exactly it happens. We'll discuss the possibilities, but this thing appears to have run its course. We'll talk a little bit about a busy Saturday in the Big Ten where Penn State, Indiana, Oregon all remain undefeated. Ohio State surviving by the skin of their teeth. Is it time to throw Ryan Day under the bus again? We'll discuss that. And then we'll wrap with the Big 12 title picture where, one, we got to give a little credit to BYU, who is playing awesome football, but two, I think Colorado quietly, all of a sudden, Colorado's the quietest team in college football. They're 6-2. They're bowl eligible. They're very much in the Big 12 title chase. We are going to discuss it all. First of all, do me a quick favor before we get started. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, go ahead and do so right now. We got new clips, new videos going up every single day, and we very much appreciate your support. Also, you can find us on Apple, Spotify. If you want to do your boy Torres a solid, go ahead, leave us a 5-star rating, a 5-star review. We really would appreciate that on Apple or Spotify. And before we also get started on the show, I want to welcome back one of our favorite sponsors, and that's, of course, Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com, okay? So I've told you a million times, but it's football season. You're on the couch Thursday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, Monday night, and you're looking for that delicious snack that's also healthy, right? Everything tastes good, but it goes right to your gut. You look like a slob. Bikini season's coming, baby. You got to look good. You got to eat healthy, but you want something that tastes good. That's where Collie Puffs comes in, okay? Collie Puffs was created, a family-owned business not far from where I live. Joey is the founder, a good person I've gotten to know well over the last couple months and years. And basically, he's just like you and me. Loves football, has a family, wants something healthy to eat on the couch when he's watching the big game, but also something that his kids like, that his wife likes, etc. And that's how he came up with Collie Puffs. This is the alternative to all the unhealthy stuff that you see in your grocery aisle. You know what we're talking about, Doritos, Fritos, whatever. No. Collie Puffs, they are made with healthy ingredients, baked, not fried. They use avocado oil, nothing greasy. But here's the great part. They taste freaking delicious. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. Go to ColliePuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFFS.com. Also, they're available on Amazon. So you're on Amazon, you're searching for whatever, your cart's full. Add one more thing. Try Collie Puffs. You're going to like them. You'll get a hook like me. We got a bunch of bags in the house. The family can't stop eating them here at the Torres household. So go ahead, ColliePuffs.com. And again, for more information, visit Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. With that said, it's Sunday. It's the last weekend in October. It is an awesome time of year if you love college football. By the way, awesome time of year if you love Major League Baseball, you love the NFL. By the way, my Chiefs-Lions over Chiefs Super Bowl pick, not looking too bad, is it? But we're talking college football today. There is no more time to waste, so let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, there is only one place to start. This was a big one in College Station. You don't need me to tell you. By the way, I do apologize. A lot of you actually reached out about the college football betting show. Where were my official picks? We didn't make any official picks last week, but this was clearly the biggest game. LSU versus Texas A&M. These were the only two teams that had yet to take a loss in SEC play. They play in College Station. And how about this? The Texas A&M Aggies lay the smackdown. Final score 38-23. Outscore LSU 31-0 in the second half. It was a complete team victory. It was a dominant statement victory for Mike Elko and his program. And I'll say this, maybe the most interesting thing out of this game came after the game went final. Now, I don't want to make this segment solely about what Mike Elko said about who we think was Jimbo Fisher, but I actually think that Mike Elko's comments very much reflect whether they're controversial, no doubt, definitely whatever, but I think it reflects who this A&M team is, why they are so good, why they have completely flipped the script overnight. And so, producer Matt, play the sound of Mike Elko after the game talking about his program.
It's not fake. It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody. This is a real program. And for all the recruits out there, this is a real place. And if you want to be really good at football.
So how about Mike Elko, okay? To quote the Shaq meme, Mike Elko, I was not familiar with your game. This is a real place. This is a real program. It's not fake. It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing people, okay? One, I got to say this. When I first saw the quote transcribed on social media, I thought it was fake. I thought there was no way it could be real. I went to listen to the sound. I love the fact that the sound is exactly how it sounds on paper. And before we get into the quote and what it kind of means for A&M, let me get one thing out of the way real quick. I'm hearing some people argue that this is somehow in some way, shape, or form a shot at Brian Kelly. I get that Brian Kelly is a little political. His dad was, in fact, a politician. But I'm sorry. Brian Kelly has never once been confused as a fast talker. As a matter of fact, he's pretty deliberate in everything that he says. And also, say what you want about Brian Kelly. You don't have to like him, but he's not a BSer. I think, if anything, Brian Kelly's been guilty of too often being too honest and not BSing enough. So this was very much a shot at Jimbo Fisher, very much a shot at the man who preceded Mike Elko. Remember, of course, Mike Elko worked for years under Jimbo Fisher. And frankly, Jimbo Fisher's best success at A&M came when Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator. When Mike Elko left, that was really when that A&M went from at least respectable 8-9 win seasons to 5-7. And then obviously the season that happened a year ago. And so I bring it up because, to me, there is no doubt that Mike Elko was talking about Jimbo Fisher. But let me also say this. What he said is 1,000% accurate. And I believe that it is a reflection of why Texas A&M is in the position that they're in. 7-1, 5-0 in the SEC, completely controlling their fate in an attempt to get to Atlanta for the first time for an SEC championship game. And of course, the 12-team college football playoff. First of all, you talk about part of the quote that wasn't in that audio, but Mike Elko talked about, we're honest. We bring good people into this building and we're honest with them. And I don't think there's a better example of that than what we saw in the second half when the starting quarterback, Connor Wigman, was benched for Marcel Reed. Listen, I'm pretty sure that if you follow a show like this, you know the story, but Connor Wigman was the starting quarterback coming into the year. He gets hurt. Marcel Reed takes over. The team plays awesome. I was actually surprised that they immediately went back to Connor Wigman when he got healthy for the Missouri game, but he played great against Missouri. It seemed like it was the right move, but he also was struggling in that game on Saturday night in College Station. And so credit to Mike Elko. If you saw the video, if you were watching the game live, you could tell Connor Wigman was not happy that he was getting pulled from that game. But Marcel Reed comes in, literally first play, he rushes for a touchdown. And Marcel Reed was the spark that they needed. How about this? He only completed 2 passes in the second half when he came in. It was for 70 yards, but it was more than enough. And obviously his play with his legs was the difference as he rushed for 3 touchdowns, 62 yards rushing. He was the difference. He was the X factor. And it comes back to what Mike Elko said about toughness, accountability. That's who we are. That's what we're about. All that good stuff. Let's also say this. You talk about toughness, about accountability, about no BSing. That defense and the physicality in which they played. Yeah, this is a different Texas A&M team, okay? First off, the defense was unbelievable. Goes without saying. Again, they were up, they were trailing, 17-7 at the half. They don't allow points until late in the game. Forced 3 Garrett Nussmeier interceptions. And how about this for a stat? LSU, and I keep saying this, it's no disrespect to any individual player. I keep getting told how great the LSU offensive line is. Well, maybe it is because they've run the ball effectively the last 2 weeks. Not against A&M. 24 yards rushing on 23 carries. So the defense forces 3 turnovers. The defense forces LSU into 24 yards rushing on 23 carries. And then, oh, by the way, how about this? The run game for Texas A&M, 242 yards on 49 carries. That's 4.9 yards per carry. And so the bottom line is, Mike Elko said it after the game. There's a great locker room video of him saying, like, look, boys, we made that team quit. They wanted nothing to do with us. We wore them down in the second half. I am so proud of you. And I'm paraphrasing, but you can find that quote, you can find that video on probably one of the Texas A&M, social media feeds. But at the end of the day, what Mike Elko said is true, is if you look at this game, if you look at this win, if you're an Aggie fan, man, just Aggie fans, let's just take a second. Congratulations, man. Listen, I know you haven't won anything yet. I know you haven't won, you haven't booked a trip to Atlanta. You haven't won an SEC title. You haven't made a college football playoff. But man, oh man, this is the guy that you've been waiting for. And frankly, let me take it a step further. This is the guy you deserve, okay? Because listen, we're going to talk about Mark Stoops in a minute, but let's never forget. And by the way, I never have an issue when a fan base gets fired up about a coaching hire that they don't like. Didn't have an issue when Tennessee did it with Schiano, although I didn't love them bringing up some of the Jerry Sandusky stuff. That's another conversation for another day. But I was on air on Fox Sports Radio during the Texas A&M basically revolt against the Mark Stoops hire. And I never believed it was the right hire. I always believed Elko was the better fit. And credit to you guys, because you have the right guy. And this is the cool thing if you're Texas A&M. And I tweeted this the other night, but it's never been about talent at Texas A&M. Mike Elko kind of said it, right? They've had the talent in the building, but there's been too much BS, too much nonsense, too much politics, too much worry about recruiting rankings, too much worry about winning a press conference. I defended Jimbo Fisher with the Nick Saban stuff, but too much worry about what everybody else is saying about you. And it's never seemingly been about football. Well, now it is. And you look at that team. They're tougher than you. They're meaner than you. They're more physical than you. They wear you down. By the way, this isn't the only team they've done it to. Did it to, Mississippi State last week. Did it a few weeks before that to Florida, where they just ran the ball right down their throat. Did it to Missouri, although that was a game that Wigman played well. This is the new A&M. A&M fans enjoy it. By the way, let me give a quick shout out. Tommy Moffitt's got to be feeling good today, okay? So Tommy Moffitt, if people don't know, is a legendary strength and conditioning coach. Was at Tennessee for a while, was at Miami for a while, but really kind of became basically a household name at LSU. Was hired by Nick Saban. When Saban left for the NFL, Les Miles retained him. When Les Miles was fired, Ed Orgeron retained him. And Tommy Moffitt was essentially the only connective tissue with all 3 of those national championships at LSU, at least on the coaching staff. Well, I bring it up, and by the way, his teams and his program was just known for toughness, for physicality, for meanness, no backing down, no wearing down, whatever. Well, when Brian Kelly came in, Tommy Moffitt Brian Kelly let Tommy Moffitt go, and he was out of the game for 2 or 3 years. And listen, I don't want to speak for him, but he wanted to get back in, and I think there was maybe a moment in time where he wasn't sure if he was going to get back in. Elko gives him a call, and right away, I remember T-Bob Hebert, who played at LSU, said, listen, I don't know how good LSU or how good A&M is going to be from a win-loss perspective, but they ain't going to be soft. They're going to be tough, and they're going to be mean, because that's what Tommy Moffitt does in that weight room. Well, guess what? You fast forward to now, They not only win this game, they destroy LSU. They beat them up. They make them quit. They twisted their arm behind their back and made them say mercy. And I think Tommy Moffitt's got to be feeling good right now. His former employer, of course, just Texas A&M just dominated them. And so now if you're A&M, listen, you don't need me to tell you what's at stake. Everything's ahead. I mean, listen, it's going to be November. There aren't very many teams that you can say completely control their own destiny. I haven't done the SEC, playoff deep dive, but there's a lot of teams that don't control their own destiny at this point, even good teams. In the Big Ten, in the SEC, wherever it is, people need other teams to lose. People need to keep winning. Texas A&M, all you got to do is keep doing what you've been doing. Now, it isn't going to be easy. At South Carolina this week, South Carolina is a really good team. At Auburn, listen, they play hard. They're competitive. Got their first SEC win, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And obviously Texas late in the year. So there's still a lot left on the schedule. I'm not going to put the cart before the horse, but you talk about a physically dominating game that you got to feel good if you're an A&M fan. You should feel good, A&M fans. Enjoy this victory. All right, so what we're going to do, take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we're going to stay in the SEC. Mark Stoops, Kentucky. Nothing nice to say. Nothing mean to say. Mark Stoops had a tough week personally last week, and there's nothing to joke about that. But another disappointing loss. And I just think it's time Kentucky and him have to figure out a way to part ways. It feels like it's run its course. We'll discuss that next. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. By the way, just knocked into my mic. We had some mic issues last week. If it does not sound good, let me know. Also, I did see a comment in the comment section. Is there any chance Tommy Moffitt could go back to LSU? I just cannot imagine, that frankly, that he'd want to, right? I mean, I'm sure Elko is taking very good care of him, and I don't know why a place that let you go, why you'd be in a rush to go back. Now, things change, people change. I don't have any insight into that, but I got to imagine he's feeling pretty good about where things are at A&M. And I think the cool thing is at Texas A&M, this thing is only beginning. All right, let's switch gears to the rest of the day in the SEC. I'll be transparent, a little bit of a quieter day in the SEC. Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, a couple others were on a bye. Credit to Texas getting a solid win at Vandy. That is no pushover game in any way, shape, or form. Ask Alabama. Alabama, by the way, listen, first time in a while. There was no nonsense, no whatever. It was all ball, took care of business, still a few too many penalties, but I think it was a totally positive step in the right direction for Alabama. You know who it wasn't a positive step in the right direction for? The Kentucky Wildcats. Okay, so it's kind of funny. So first of all, let me get the sad part out of the way off the top. Mark Stoops did have a very tough week personally in his personal life last week. His mother passed away. Certainly wish him and his family the best. And when I criticize him in the coming minutes, I don't want it to sound like a personal attack. But I have a job to do. Kentucky fans, as season ticket holders, as people who pay for a product, have an expectation. And transparently, Mark Stoops has a job to do as well. And I don't know. I don't want to make it sound personal because that's not my intention. But what I will say, coming into this game, you're playing Auburn. You're at home. It's your final SEC home game, by the way. And Auburn hasn't won a game. And it's kind of crazy because I was talking to producer Matt about this throughout the week. For people who don't know, producer Matt is an Auburn grad. I said, Auburn keeps playing hard. They haven't gotten across the finish line yet, but probably should have beaten Missouri, should have beaten Oklahoma. And I don't know what to make of this Kentucky team. Well, now, after Saturday night, there is no doubt. Congrats to Auburn. The 24-10 win gives them their first win in SEC play. But to me, the story is Mark Stoops. Kentucky now is 3-5 overall. They've lost 3 games that were really sort of winnable. I believe they were favorites in all 3 of them. And I'll be transparent. As this thing continues to unfold, no disrespect intended, whatever. I just kind of feel like the Mark Stoops era has run its course. And it'd be good, and I think it's going to happen, if these two sides figure out a way where Mark Stoops is not the head coach at Kentucky next year. Before we get into it, a couple caveats I always try to say. Whenever, things aren't good with Kentucky and Mark Stoops right now, but I think the national person would sit there and say, Torres, Mark Stoops is the best coach they've ever had. And what I would say, and I've said this consistently, he has elevated Kentucky to levels that we probably couldn't have expected when he took over in 2009, 2010, that time frame. Bottom line, they've been to a bowl game every year since 2015. He has elevated the program, there is no doubt. What you also can't deny is that the program is absolutely 100% not only trending in the wrong direction, it's probably in as bad of a spot as really it's been pretty much since like year 1, year 2, year 3 of the Stoops era. Here's the bottom line. These are the stats. These are inarguable. If you're a national person that doesn't follow Kentucky on a day-to-day basis and you're just sitting there saying Stoops is great, whatever. Well, first of all, the coaching salaries came out a few weeks ago. He's one of the highest paid coaches in college football. And I know Kentucky's a tough job, but when you're paid that much money, you have a responsibility to win at a relatively high level. Well, here are the facts. Kentucky has now, this is incredible. They've lost 7 straight SEC home games. They've lost 7 straight SEC home games. As you can see, producer Matt did a great job on the screen. This is the first time since 2013 they have not won an SEC home game on their schedule. So this is the first time since 2013, over a decade, that they didn't win a single SEC home game. And they're now 2-13 in their, 2-11 in their last 13 SEC home games. 2-11 over a 3-year stretch in SEC home games. Now, I understand, Georgia's really good. You had Bama come through once or twice. LSU most years is really good. But to be 2-13, that's over a 3-year stretch. I don't want to say it's inexcusable, but at the same time, there's a lot of people at Kentucky that are paying a lot of money to show up to that stadium every single week. And the crazy part is, this was the first game that it felt like people are checked out. They're just checked out, and I don't think it's getting any better. The truth is, listen, I give Kentucky fans credit. We talked about this after the South Carolina game. Kentucky fans showed up ready to go for that South Carolina game. The team let them down. A week later, they came ready to go for number 1 Georgia in a game that the team probably should have won. And I'm sorry, I'll still say it. Mark Stoops made the wrong decision to punt. That's not the conversation for this moment. But you lose that Georgia game. You beat Ole Miss. And again, I feel like the fan base had this guy's back. They showed up for Vandy. You get a complete no-show in that game. And I'm sorry, but this was the stretch where if you were Kentucky, you had to make your move. I know that there are no easy games in the SEC, but we talked about it. After they beat Ole Miss, they were sitting there at 3-2, I guess it would have been. And we said, wait a second now, they're 3-2, and their next 3, Vandy at home, at Florida, Auburn at home. There's no easy stretches in the SEC, but that is about as easy of a stretch as you could possibly get in SEC play. Vandy's a team you've taken care of previously. I know they're better, but it was at home. Florida is a place that you have had success. They won 2 of their last 3 at the Swamp prior to last week. And then, of course, Auburn was coming in really struggling. Well, you go 0-3, and here's the bottom line. If everybody wants to argue that Stoops, if you get to a bowl game, well, guess what? They're now 3-5. They still have at Tennessee and at Texas, which means they're either going to have to win at Tennessee or at Texas just to get bowl eligible. And that's if they beat Louisville, let alone when they play Murray State here in the coming weeks. So the standard has been lowered. I think this really goes back to last year. It's easy to forget now, but when he was flirting with the A&M, with A&M, going into that Louisville game, I think a lot of people were kind of like, you know what, if he wants to leave, we're okay with it. He ends up beating Louisville. He ends up having the situation with A&M. I don't really want to say he did turn him down, but he was going until he realized that he wasn't wanted there. And so the standard has been lowered. Now, what probably won't be lowered, and I want to talk about this because I know Kentucky fans, I haven't looked at the chat yet, but I already know what you're thinking. Torres, his buyout is bananas. He's going to be here as long as he wants. And here's the thing. I know the buyout's a lot. According to USA Today, it's about $44 million. But what I would say, I've been covering college sports long enough where when it gets so toxic and it gets so bad, it feels like we always kind of figure out a way to get whatever, for the change that needs to be made. And I feel like this is a change that needs to be made. With the buyout, first of all, let's remember, very few buyouts are a lump sum 100% payment on day one. Let's go back to Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher, when he's fired $76 million, that's the craziest thing. Even the Texas oil, they can't do that. And then you realize, yeah, he's getting a big check, no doubt. I think it was like 10 to 12 to 15 million. But then the other 60 million is spread out over like 10 years. It's like $5 million a year for 10 years, and it's offset if he gets another job. And so that Jimbo Fisher salary, all of a sudden, you're like, you know what? It's not quite as bad as people make it out to be. By the way, John Calipari, I don't want to bring up John, a 4-letter word in Lexington right now, but what we had these conversations on this show in March, in April. We said it. He can't come back. It just feels like it's time for something new. Now he got another job, and that's where I'll be curious what happens next with Mark Stoops. Listen, I don't know what it's going to be or how it's going to go down. Is he going to be able to find another job? Frankly, I don't think there's going to be a lot of jobs even open this cycle. If Florida does what they need to do and they keep Billy Napier, just think there's not going to be a huge trickle-down effect. I'm not saying he would get the Florida job, but if Florida opens and they hire this guy, then maybe Stoops could slide over there. And I don't think it's going to happen. So does he take another job? Does he step aside? I mean, let me ask you, Kentucky fans, you guys follow this even closer than I do, and I try to follow everything as closely as I can. Does he look happy right now? That's the thing that stands out about Mark Stoops to me, is that when you watch his press conferences, I think he's over it. It feels like every press conference is the same answer to the same question. I don't know what's going on. We got to get better. We're going to work hard to figure it out. And I just think he's over it. And we know what his stance has been on NIL. We know what his stance, he's talked about it. He did that interview over the summer where I criticized him because he said, all my job is all about raising NIL money. And it's like, I think he's kind of over it. By the way, I think it's going to be hard for him to raise NIL money going into the portal. So again, I don't know if he's fired. I don't know if he finds another job. I don't know if there's a way where you can find a middle ground where maybe he resigns and you get for a reduced buyout. It'll be interesting. I know his relationship with Mitch Barnhart. I don't think Mitch Barnhart's going to fire him, but is there a way that they just sit down and say, do you really want to do this anymore? Do you really want to kind of run this back? I mean, by the way, the A&M thing, I think the A&M thing was kind of a reflection that he probably knew at last year that this thing had kind of peaked. They weren't very good last year. You're going to divisionless football. Remember, by the way, Kentucky, Barnhart and Stoops are two of the biggest proponents of keeping the SEC in an 8-game schedule because they know how much harder that makes the job. So listen, he's been incredible at Kentucky. This isn't a tear down Mark Stoops thing. It's not a make it personal thing. I've had a few interactions with him. He's always been kind to me. His staff has always been kind to me. This isn't about that. What it's about is there is a baseline standard when you're getting paid $9 million a year. And right now he's not meeting it. I will be curious if somewhere along the way, he decides and the program decides to go in a different direction. Maybe later this week, by the way, we might have a little Kentucky basketball content, but maybe later this week we talk about potential candidates who could potentially fill that role. What kind of job is it? But right now, man, it just feels like it cannot keep going on like this. Really quickly, want to rip through some other big stories in college football. First of all, I'll say this. I don't feel like we have gone enough in coverage of the Big Ten. By the way, I see the comments section is on fire with some of the Stoops stuff, so stick around. I'll get to some of those comments here in about 10 minutes from now. Really quickly, I just want to rip through the Big Ten. I thought it was actually a very interesting week in the Big Ten. I feel like every week, everything in the SEC is so compelling that outside of like Oregon, Ohio State, we haven't talked a ton of Big Ten. But here's the bottom line. Just want to rip through a couple games really quick. First of all, do want to give credit to Oregon. Oregon was number one in the country. This time last week, I kind of sort of made the half-hearted argument that could you make the argument Georgia should be number one, win at Texas, win against Clemson on a neutral. Like those are two of probably the 5 best wins in college football right now. But Oregon got the number one spot. They deserve the number one spot. I'll take the L, Oregon fans. I was wrong on that. And credit to them. They looked awesome on Saturday. And why I want to acknowledge it was because this was kind of the game where couldn't you kind of see the letdown, right? Great win a few weeks ago. You get to number one in the polls. You're going to Michigan next week, by the way. Well, you're at home. It's a midday game, 12:30 local time kick. But Illinois is a good team. And Illinois is a team that if you don't show up ready to play, they're going to beat your brains in. And instead, it was actually the exact opposite as Oregon destroyed them. 527 yards of total offense. The thing that stood out to me, Illinois is known as kind of this rough and tumble physical team. And it was really Oregon that really took the hammer to them. Oregon finishes the game with 229 yards rushing against Illinois. That includes about 6 yards per carry, 527 yards of total offense. So credit to Oregon, big win. And oh, by the way, next week, I know Michigan isn't playing very well right now, but we'll see them at Michigan. That's probably, frankly, the toughest game left on their schedule between Oregon finishing the regular season undefeated, which would obviously clinch them a spot in the Big Ten championship game. Speaking of undefeated, Coach Sig and those Hoosiers, they just won't quit, baby, okay? Indiana beats Washington to improve to 8-0. Final score 31-17. And the significant note here is what you can see on the screen. It wasn't just that they beat Washington. It's not just that they're 8-0. They did it with a backup. And isn't that the perfect example of a zero excuses program? We listened to Coach Sig, and he's kind of had a national platform the last few weeks, and he kind of became famous. He had the famous quote, all I do is win, Google me. But it's also kind of a next man up mentality of we don't make excuses. All we do is win games. Well, Taven Jackson, Trace Jackson Davis's brother, comes in as the backup quarterback for Curtis Rourke, and they don't miss a beat. 31-17 is the final score. Indiana's in a fascinating spot. You look at their schedule, Michigan State this coming week, then Michigan at home. Michigan's not very good right now. Indiana will be favored in that game, barring something truly shocking. Then you get a bye before you play Ohio State, and then you close with Purdue. I'm sorry, but the way this team is playing, I think at worst, you're talking about a 3-1 team. And if they finish 11-1, they're probably going to the Big Ten championship game. I mean, obviously, there's a scenario where that wouldn't happen. If Penn State wins out and Oregon wins out, or if Oregon wins out and Ohio State wins out. But 11-1 in the Big Ten is going to get you into the playoff. So we'll see what happens. Listen, maybe they get tripped up. They haven't gotten tripped up all year. They're a freaking freight train. They deserve every piece of credit that they're getting. Credit to Indiana, which has improved to 8-0. As I said, they face Michigan State this coming week. I don't think there's much else to add. Let me also give credit to a program that I have kind of been critical of through the years. If you listen to the show, kind of going after James Franklin. Don't really care about your wins over Rutgers and whoever. You don't beat Michigan when they had Harbaugh, at least in recent years. You don't beat Ohio State. And last year was kind of the year, right? Ohio State had the worst quarterback situation they're ever going to have. Michigan didn't know who was coaching them an hour before kickoff. You go 0-2 against them. I said, I'm done with this program, okay? Same time, I got to give them credit. They're not only 8-0, but I think more importantly, Saturday night, that was a game that a previous iteration of Penn State would have lost. Penn State on the road, their starting quarterback, Drew Aller, goes down right before halftime. Second half, they're playing with a backup quarterback. And again, that's a game that Penn State would have never won in the past. Instead, the defense was lights out. They gave up 3 points after the second half, but 2 scoring drives from the offense in the second half, plus a pick six. They get the win. I'm recording, by the way, it's about 7:30 Eastern time on Sunday night. We will see if there is any sort of update on Drew Aller. As I'm recording, there is no update. We don't know his status for Saturday. Of course, they play Ohio State at home. That's a big one. But listen, I just want to take a second, give Penn State credit. I've been critical of James Franklin. He deserves this moment because I know it was an interesting week for him, to say the least. But listen, on the field, that was a game where Penn State would have rolled over and died in the corner probably a year or two ago. They get the win. Now they play Ohio State. Really quickly, I do want to talk Ohio State. And I'm not going to do what you all think I'm going to do and just crush Ryan Day, okay? But at the same time, 21-17 final score against the Nebraska team. Remember, Nebraska lost by 40-plus points to Indiana a week ago. Ohio State is coming off of a bye. And it was just a really ugly, uninspired effort in that game. Now, I don't want to dismiss because, listen, Ohio State, they get the win, and that's all that matters. But Nebraska went for it on fourth down, third quarter, had a chance to put up points. They didn't get it. And Nebraska actually took the lead in the fourth quarter before a Will Howard touchdown drive. So again, I'm not just going to sit there and just blanket Ryan Day's the worst and Ohio State's overrated and blah, 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 blah. But this is the frustration with Ryan Day. And we're really at a point where, like, out of a bye, aren't you supposed to be peaking in October going into November? Aren't you supposed to be playing your best football? And I don't want to take away from Nebraska, but shouldn't you not look like that? Because I watched the game. It was bad. First of all, Will Howard, bad pick, whatever, that happens. But the run game finished with 64 yards on 31 carries in this game, okay? I know Nebraska's run defense is good, and I know Ohio State's starting left tackle is out with an injury, but I mean, under 300 yards of total offense. And here's my thing. You got a lot of dudes on your team. And that was the crazy part, right? You have Quinshaw Judkins. You have Jeremiah Smith. You have Emeka Ibuka. And on the biggest play of the game, when you can extend it out and run out the clock, you throw a screen pass behind the line of scrimmage. It gets it's like you have so much talent. What are you doing? And so to me, listen, I just think we're setting up for a fascinating, probably 6 to 8 weeks for Ryan Day in Ohio State. Because the bottom line, I was thinking about this. I've been out on Ryan Day for a while, and the argument is, well, he's 74-7 or whatever the record is. I don't really care. And what do I always say? You're not judged by what you do against Rutgers, previously Indiana, Purdue, Michigan State, whatever. You're judged on 3 things. Beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, compete for a national championship. Haven't beaten Michigan in 3 years, haven't won the Big Ten in 3 years. Now, 2 years ago, they could have won the national championship. But at the same time, here is where I would be concerned if I was Ohio State. First off, you shouldn't look like that. I'm sorry. But I was thinking about this. Most talented roster, most talented offense for sure in terms of skill position guys in college football, okay? I understand everybody has bad games. But under 300 yards of total offense in October, going into a huge game next weekend at Penn State. And what's interesting about it is this. And oh, by the way, here's the other thing. You understand Chip Kelly's getting paid $2 million a year. You understand that Jim Knowles is getting paid $1.9 million a year. I looked it up before we came on air. That's almost $4 million for your 2 coordinators, $20 million for your roster. You want to look a little better than 21-17 against a true freshman in Dylan Raiola on the road late in October. And so Ryan Day is getting paid a lot of money to be a CEO head coach. But he is now being paid a lot of money, and everything is going to fall on him if things don't go well. And I was thinking about this, is people have made the argument for years, well, I mean, if you're going to fire him, who are you going to get that's better? Who are you going to get that doesn't beat Michigan, doesn't win the Big Ten with $4 million in coordinators and $20 million roster? Oh, I could find 50 coaches that could do the exact same thing. So, said I wasn't going to crush Ryan Day, but I just did. But I'll tell you, this weekend, this is probably the biggest game of Ryan Day's career, and let me explain why. if Ohio State loses this weekend, they're basically out of the Big Ten title picture. Like, you understand that, right? Because if they lose this weekend, and assuming Oregon beats Michigan, Ohio State would not have the tiebreaker against Oregon or Penn State, which means they would need one of those two teams to lose 3 times in the last 3 weeks for them to make the conference championship. That's clearly not happening. By the way, Indiana's not a pushover either. Even if you beat Indiana, it's just like they're going to be eliminated from the Big Ten title race if they lose this weekend. So if you lose this weekend, all of a sudden we're now talking about you got to go to the playoff and win a bunch of games there to make that fan base happy. So I don't want to keep going on with Ohio State. We got plenty of other stuff to get to before we wrap the show. We got a lot of questions in the chat. I appreciate it. By the way, a lot of you watching on Twitter, go over to YouTube, click subscribe, click like. I appreciate your support. But man, oh man, Ryan Day, can you just put together like 4 weeks in a row, 2 weeks in a row against teams that you're supposed to beat up and just beat them up? Big game against Penn State this weekend. You don't win that one. Listen, it's going to get really bad. It's going to get really bad if you don't beat Penn State, and Penn State's a good team. Really quickly, do want to get to some of your questions in just a moment. Producer Matt, if there's a couple good ones, maybe start pulling them aside. Just very quickly, do want to talk about the Big 12 title race because, listen, we talk about the SEC. We talk about the Big Ten. We talk about the ACC with Miami and Clemson. Big 12 is kind of interesting. First off, got a lot of BYU fans. Torres, show us some love. BYU has to be the quietest 8-0 team in college football. They destroyed UCF on Saturday. LJ Martin was awesome. I watched a lot of that game. They actually looked really good. The quarterback, man, they're just a really fun team. They just cause a lot of turnovers. They cause a lot of chaos. They're well coached. And they're just a team that you watch them. They're just a really fun watch. Jake Retzlaff, I thought he played well. Probably wasn't his best game, but 228 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. But they're a really fun team. They deserve credit. And by the way, very interesting title race there because BYU and Iowa State both tied 8-0, 5-0 in the league. And so, both are undefeated. Both are undefeated. I believe Iowa State's only 7-0. Forgive me. So yeah, Iowa State's 7-0, 4-0. BYU is 8-0, 5-0 in the league. But I'll tell you this, credit to those two teams. You know who else is right behind them in the standings? We have 2 teams undefeated in league play in BYU and Iowa State. And right behind the 2 of them, one lost Kansas State, who we all expected to be there. They were preseason top 20 team. I think they finished second in the preseason poll. And the other team that's right behind the 2 leaders in the Big 12 standings, it's Colorado and Coach Prime, Shiloh Sanders, Travis Hunter, LeJohntay Wester. Colorado beats Cincinnati on Saturday night to improve to 6-2 and 4-1 in the Big 12. And so I want to talk about this story because, listen, I will say this, okay? Let's go ahead and dive in. Colorado 6-2. They're bowl eligible. They're very much in the Big 12 title picture. But at the same time, what I think has been so cool is that they're just quietly winning football games. There's not a lot of noise. There's not a lot of off-the-field stuff. And I will admit this. A year ago, when all the hype started, when they beat TCU, there were a lot of people guilty in the media of getting too excited too quickly, playing up everything that Deion Sanders did. And you know who was one of them? This guy right here, okay? I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to deny it. I was a Coach Prime truther. And I still think, by the way, he went from 1-11 to 4-8 a year ago. That is a significant improvement. But the bottom line is they did start 3-0. They did finish 1-8. And there were a lot of struggles down the stretch. And there were a lot of question marks going into the offseason. And I go back to that Nebraska game. And I'll be honest, I remember, and people are going to get in the comments, and you're right. After the Nebraska game, I just said they're 1-1. They get beat up really bad. I don't know how much we're actually going to be talking about them going forward. Well, since that Nebraska game, they're 5-1. Their only loss was to Kansas State in a game where Travis Hunter got hurt, wasn't playing. Jimmy Horn got hurt, wasn't playing. So that's basically your 2 best wide receivers or 2 of your 3 best wide receivers. And oh, by the way, even with that, Shiloh Sanders, of course, your starting safety, was coming off injury. He was rusty. But by the way, even with all that, you know what's crazy? Colorado had the lead in the fourth quarter against Kansas State and easily could have won that game. So that is their only loss since the second week of the season, destroyed Colorado State. They did need some good fortune against Baylor. But even the Baylor game, if you actually watched it, they were kind of in control the entire second half. They gave up a punt return at one point, or a kickoff return at one point for a touchdown. They were the better team for about the final probably 35 to 40 minutes before that Shedeur Sanders deep pass forced overtime. But they beat Baylor, destroy UCF. The Kansas State game happened. They destroyed who else? Who am I missing here? They destroyed somebody, and then they beat Cincinnati last week. Why am I missing a game? I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that they are now 6-2 and 4-1 in the Big 12. And I just want to give Coach Prime credit, because a year ago, it was easy to get too high, but it was easy to get too low with this program. Well, now, if you're not denying that this is a great coach, that this is a great program builder, that he has a plan, that he is executing that plan, then I'm sorry. You just do not know what the heck you're talking about. And I keep going back to this because I have said this quite a bit. Even when I was a little bit down on this team, I remember saying, like, you go back to 2 years ago, and the first offseason he took over, when he kind of came in, he said, I'm bringing my own luggage and it's a Louis. A lot of people were forced out of the program, but at that point, it was just about filling out bodies. And really this offseason, if you look at all the guys that he brought in, he was selective, but he hit on a ton. BJ Green from Arizona State has been awesome on the defensive line. LeJante Wester, wide receiver from Florida Atlantic, has been awesome. His brother, Jalen Wester, is, I believe, I'm tripping on his name, but Jalen Wester, awesome on the defensive side of the ball. Preston Hodge, cornerback, awesome on the defensive side of the ball. And what I want to just take a moment to do is two things. I want to fully explain how crazy this Coach Prime rebuild is, okay? Because I think everyone's saying, oh, Torres, you were the one that said, no. Here's the truth. And I tweeted this out. Producer Matt, you can pop the tweet if you haven't. But Colorado 2 years ago was 1-11 in the year that he took over, okay? Of their 11 losses, 10 were by 21 or more points. And I'll tell you this, I went back and looked it up. I'm just going to read some of this to you. In the year before Coach Prime took over, they lost by 42 to Minnesota. I don't think Minnesota scored 42 in a game in the last 2 years. They lost by 42. They lost by 23 to Arizona, 33 to Oregon State, 39 to Oregon, 33 to USC, 47 to Washington, and 42 to Utah, okay? And so for that team to, first of all, just go 4-8 last year was an accomplishment. But to now be 6-2 this late in the year, and they're very much in the Big 12 title picture. As a matter of fact, with the way the schedule is broken, they're actually in pretty good shape. You look at the schedule. So their final 4 games, okay? Next game might be the toughest. Colorado plays at Texas Tech. They have a bye this week. They call it an open week in college, but they play at Texas Tech. Then Utah at home. Utah is a train wreck, okay? So Utah, I feel bad. I don't think it's Kyle Whittingham's fault that Cam Rising keeps getting hurt, but they're a disaster. Kansas right now is in second to last place. They were picked. They were a preseason top 25 team. They're 2-6, 1-4 in the Big 12. And Oklahoma State was a preseason top 25 team. They're 3-5, 0-5 in the Big 12. So how about this? Colorado goes from the hunter to the hunted, and teams that we thought were going to be the hunters are now going to have to play spoiler down the stretch. But Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, deserves credit for what he has done. By the way, let's give a little credit to the AD, Rick George, too. It's easy to sit here and say, oh, everybody could have seen this coming. No. Remember, the year that Colorado hired him, there were a lot of jobs that opened early that year. That was the year all those jobs opened early. Auburn opened early. Nebraska opened early. Arizona State opened early. Remember, Georgia Tech opened early. I remember doing videos like Georgia Tech. Coach Prime played for the Falcons. Coach Prime played for the Braves. Got to hire him. Arizona State, kind of a cool vibe. Coach Prime's got a cool vibe. But you go back. By the way, I said Auburn should hire him. And I love Hugh Freeze, but, I think Coach Prime would have done well there. But the bottom line is there was only one coach that was willing to hire him. Now, I think Cincinnati, ironically, who Colorado beat on Saturday, got into the mix late. But I don't think it changes the fact that, Nobody was like, people weren't knocking down the door to bring this guy to the FBS level. And I think there were a lot of people that thought, oh, it's going to be a sideshow. And he does the first press conference. This is my son. He's your starting quarterback. And oh my goodness, it's going to be crazy. And all Coach Prime has done, this team has quietly gotten better. You watch them. The crazy part is I don't think they've played their best football the couple of these games. Like the Cincinnati game, a lot of penalties, a lot of this. They won, and they didn't even have to sweat it. So give Colorado credit. I am so excited to watch this over the final 3 or 4 weeks. They need some help. Kansas State and Iowa State play on the final week of the season, so one of those teams is going to take at least one loss. But, they're going to need somebody to lose somewhere along the way, and then I don't know how tiebreakers would work. They'd have to win out from there. But I'll tell you this, listen, for a BYU fan listening, for a Kansas State fan listening, for an Iowa State fan listening, no disrespect intended to your program. If this team makes the playoff, it would be so freaking cool. I don't care. Man, I don't care. I feel like Will Ferrell and Elf. I'm in love, and I don't care who hears it, okay? I want Colorado in that playoff. I think Shedeur, Travis Hunter, it would be so electric. We'll see what happens. They need some help, but this is a great story. Producer Matt, really quick before we go, any intriguing questions before we get out of here? You can drop your questions in the comment section. I know there was a lot on Mark Stoops. Alan says, we need a new offensive coordinator at Kentucky. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. All I would say to that is, I've heard for 5 straight years you need a new offensive coordinator. Who was the guy? Eddie Gran. Oh, he was the worst coordinator that's ever existed. Then you bring in Liam Cohen. You have the one good year, and then Liam Cohen leaves for the NFL, for the Los Angeles Rams. You bring in Scagnarello. He's a disaster. It's the second offensive coordinator in 3 years. Then Liam Cohen comes back last year. They're not good. We'll blame Liam Cohen. He leaves for the NFL. So it's like, how many offensive coordinators before you realize it starts with Stoops? It does. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. Any other questions, Producer Matt? If you fire Stoops, who are you going to hire? Well, that'll be a great segment for later in the week. The name, obviously, that comes to mind, and I think every Kentucky fan knows the name that I am going to go with, and it's a guy that I think you're going to get, by the way, if the job opens. I think he would have taken the job last year if it had opened. That's obviously John Summerall, who is now the head coach at Tulane. Tulane, by the way, playing good football, 6-2 overall, but was at Troy, 23-4 in 2 years at Troy. This is a guy who played at Kentucky, who was an assistant at Kentucky, who was the co-defensive coordinator at Kentucky. I think not only would he, I think he'd take the job. So we'll see what happens. Listen, Mark Stoops is owed $44 million. That's the number one thing. I don't know if there's another job that makes sense. I don't know if he just takes a year off, but I'm adamant. And I don't mean this in any sort of negative way, but it just feels like that thing has run its course, and it feels like it might be time for something new. Really quick, anything else before we go? Stoops for the last 3. See, Jose said this well. Jose says, Stoops says for the last 3 years has said he doesn't know what's wrong with the team nor how to fix it. Isn't that your job? Jose, you nailed it. And listen, I'm not a Kentucky fan. What Kentucky football does not matter to me. But at the same time, I watch the press conferences. I listen to the quotes. And the quotes are the same every week. Don't know what's wrong. Got to get it fixed. And it's like, I think even he's tired of going to the podium and having no answers for why his team doesn't show up. But here's the truth. And again, I want to be clear. I know he went through an awful personal experience this week. This is not a personal criticism. But his team is not showing up to play. They didn't show up against Vandy. They didn't show up against South Carolina. They didn't show up against Auburn. They made the quarterback change on Saturday night. It's like, at a certain point, it falls on the head coach. They've had 5 offensive coordinators the last 5 years, Liam Cohen twice. But at some point, it's not the offensive coordinator. At some point, it's not the players. At some point, it's the guy calling the shots, and the guy calling the shots makes $9 million a year. Anything else, Matt, before we go? That might be the last one. For producer Matt, basketball related. This is great. All right. Cooper Flagg. Apparently Duke is playing an exhibition as we speak. Casey, who's my guy. I love Casey. 2-7 at half. Cooper Flagg is apparently 2 for 7 at the half. Don't think he's that good. What do you think about the game November 12th? Well, first of all, Casey, producer Matt is going to be at the game. He will be interviewing Kentucky fans. If there's any Kentucky fans, feel free to DM me. If you want to be interviewed live from Atlanta, let me know. But producer Matt is going to be there. I will not be able to attend, unfortunately. Listen, I think Kentucky's going to be, and by the way, stay tuned to the channel. I think we're going to have some Kentucky basketball related content that you're going to like later in the week. I think Kentucky's really good. I did a clip on it. I did a part of it on my show on Thursday. I know it's Kentucky Wesleyan. A 71-point exhibition win is a great win. I don't care. It's just a great win, period. Kentucky Wesleyan, by the way, beat Louisville last year in the exhibition slate. And so I think Kentucky's really good. I think Kentucky has a chance to, I've said it. I think Alabama is the clear number one team in the SEC. And I'm sorry. Auburn, Arkansas, Kentucky, maybe Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Illinois in a charity exhibition. I think those are the teams that could be in the mix. Tennessee lost today to Indiana. So I'm not, whatever. We'll see on Tennessee. But I think there's 5-6 teams right behind Alabama that have the case for number 2. And I think Kentucky's one of them. I've said it consistently. If Kentucky was number 23 in the first preseason poll, 8th picked team in the SEC. If they're the 8th best team in the SEC, this is the greatest SEC in the history. This is the greatest conference in the history of college basketball. By the way, Tennessee, A&M, I'm also down on. A&M got destroyed by Houston in a charity exhibition game today. I know you can't judge a team playing Houston, but I will say, A&M pretty much the last 2 years has started really, really, really high in the polls. And last year they started really high in the polls. We did this when the AP poll came out, but they struggled quite a bit. Do we have anything else before we get out of here? But yeah, by the way, producer Matt will be at that game. When do we start getting on the president and the AD? Ooh, when I saw president, I thought we were going another direction there. I thought I'm not Joe Rogan here. Okay, I got scared for a second. Get on the president and the AD that start giving out these ridiculous contracts. Tim brings up a great point. I actually thought of this as I was prepping the show. Is Mark Stoops, listen, really good coach. Okay, we've talked about it quite a bit. I've done the mea culpa about that he is a good coach. It is kind of crazy though that Mitch Barnhart got bailed out by Calipari taking the Arkansas job. And now he needs kind of a weird bailout to get out of this Mark Stoops contract. If Mark Stoops just says, you're going to pay me every single dollar or I'm not leaving, that's on that's on Mitch Barnhart. As far as, listen, I'll say this. I don't know at the SEC Big Ten level, there's so much money, but I've said it a few times. I was at an NIL conference about 2 weeks ago now, and everybody's trying to figure out how to save money here, get more money to athletes there. And I think some of these ridiculous, you just can't keep living in this world of 40, 50, 70, 30, $25 million to get rid of a football coach or a basketball coach. I do think that's going to change. I think people are going to have to meet in the middle. And I think schools have to be more aware, right? Like, I'm just going to give you an example. I don't know what Steve Sarkisian's buyout is, but my guess is like Steve Sarkisian, I'm just using him as an example. Could be Kalen DeBoer, could be Kirby Smart, whatever. If Kirby Smart has a $90 million buyout or $50 million or $60 million, whatever, that's ridiculous. He's not going anywhere. And Mark Stoops, yes, he had other opportunities, but like, was he ever really going? There was one opportunity, Texas A&M, and that's the crazy part. Mark Stoops, to get out of his contract, it's like a $4 million buyout. So if whoever wants to hire him, if Kirk Ferentz retires and Iowa wants to hire him, they would only owe Kentucky $4 million. But if Kentucky's going to fire Mark Stoops, they're going to owe him $44 million. Feels like there has to be somewhere in the middle, and we'll get there. If we have one more question, the chat has been great today. I'm so glad we did this Sunday night show. For producer also, let's see, Casey with the basketball questions. I think he's good, not a god like everyone treats him. I assume that's Cooper Flagg, probably not Mark Stoops. But what about UK versus Gonzaga and Clemson? I've appreciated the UK coverage the whole time. Go Cats. So we're talking basketball. Gonzaga, I'll say this. Gonzaga, it's charity exhibition season. Gonzaga lost a charity exhibition to USC on Saturday night. Remember, USC is coached by Eric Musselman. They were picked to finish tied for 12th in the Big Ten this year. And I said, has an Eric Musselman team ever not been pretty much really good. I know last year was not good, but the idea that Muss was going to go to USC and finish 12th, 13th, 14th in the Big Ten is ridiculous. I still think Gonzaga is good. Credit to USC for getting the win. Clemson's obviously going to take a drop off with PJ Hall. So I'll tell you what, chat's great. Best chat we've had in a while. I do think we do have to get out of here. I do see one more question about the Kentucky basketball scrimmage. They did beat Kentucky Wesleyan. I know they play again on Tuesday. We got plenty of time to talk basketball. Tell you what, though, I would love to stay here all night. I love these. I know I love the nights when the chat is really rolling, but unfortunately, I do think it is time for me to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, do me a favor. Make sure to subscribe to YouTube. By the way, if you're a Kentucky fan still lingering, wanting to complain about Stoops, we'll have more Stoops coverage. Some good basketball coverage this week. I got an interview that I think you're going to like a lot. Can't say much more as of right now. If you're not subscribed, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify on, subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify on the podcast platforms. Make sure you're following on social media, Aaron_Torres on Twitter, Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram. If you're not on Instagram, make sure to follow me there. And again, by the way, Aaron Torres Pod on TikTok as well. And as you can see, thank you again to Collie Puffs, an incredible partner, an incredible sponsor of the Aaron Torres Pod. I got to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support here on a Sunday night, and I will be back. Got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. It's getting to be that time. College football, college basketball, crossing over, stories every day. See you soon. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, you F-head. Unblock me.